Hello, everyone, and welcome to another special episode of this StudioMEcast. I'm your host, and today we have another exciting guest. This is Barry Stevens. He is a filmmaker, and we're going to be talking about all kinds of stuff today. We're just going to jump right in. Barry, thank you for joining me today.
Thanks for having me, man.
Absolutely. So, you have had an eclectic career up to this point. I believe it was your word for it. You've done some stuff with being a teamster or on locations and stuff like that. And you and I met on a project, and it was a pretty cool experience. Looking forward to talking with you about what's going on with you and just how you approach film and all that.
Sure, fire away.
Absolutely. So, well, first off, fun question: what's your favorite movie, if you have one?
That's an easy one. Well, Predator is my favorite movie, and I can defend it.
Really? Oh, you don't have to defend that. That's a cool choice, though. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like Predator, Amelie, Braveheart was in there, Old Boy.
Yeah.
So,
all good choices.
Predator, hands down, 100%.
Yeah.
It's just I can rewatch it as many times as I want. It's super quotable. It's got a really cool dynamic. Got a really cool cast. So it's directed by the same guy who did Die Hard, which this shows how much of a cinephile that I'm not. But I just realized that like a couple years ago.
Mm-hmm.
So, but yeah, Predator, 100%.
That's awesome. I've always loved the premise of Predator. It's really unique. It's oddly relatable. It's just like, oh, guy goes hunting, on this planet.
Becomes the prey.
Yeah, it's a wonderful. And I've always thought that was a franchise that had so much potential for where it could go. And I think with Prey coming out, they've started to go back more with the history of it, which I think is really cool.
Yeah.
I heard they had a whole lot of Predator like prequels and sequels that were based on those historical concepts.
Dark Horse Comics, at least in the 90s where everything comes from, except for Predators, the 80s. They had a whole litany of stories, and then they crossed over with Aliens, which is just the natural thing to do. And so there's a lot of lore. They don't really, I've not read enough to know if they talk about like their home world or any of that kind of world building, but just the simple premise of just being hunted and it selecting the best of the best.
Yeah.
No women and children and no one that's unarmed. He just focuses on challenging himself to like, it's like in
the bigger the fish you pull in, the more points on the buck. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
It's the really cool concept.
I think it's Art of War, Lao Tzu or something. Sun Tzu. Yeah, Lao Tzu is Taoism. Sun Tzu says a true competitor wants their opponent at their best, right? So it's like that kind of vibe of just like you never really know if you're a true champion unless you take on other champions. And I always thought that was like a really interesting, resounding principle. And I also, not to spend all my time talking about this,
we can talk about whatever, man.
I grew up watching it on a recorded VHS. So it was recorded off of the television.
I had a few of those.
And so you had to like fast forward through the commercials but it was PG. And so for my 18th birthday, I bought myself a copy of the R-rated version, and I finally saw it like in all of its glory.
Wow.
And but yeah, even up to then, it was still my favorite movie.
Did you like it more as the R-rated version, or did you have a nostalgia for the TV version of it?
The impact of the movie still sat PG, so the R was just a nice little flavor to add on to it. So, but yeah, Predator.
In a lot of ways, I think R is really smartly been turning into a marketing campaign for or it did for a bunch of superhero movies when like finally Logan came out. And I remember when the first X-Men came out, and I remember standing by a tree with some of my friends. Like I forget how old I was. I think I wasn't even a teenager yet. And we were just like, man, could you, what does this mean? Could you imagine if they ever made an R-rated movie with Wolverine where he's like,
like
where
the
it's
comics.
Like the comics, and half of that's never gonna happen. It's never gonna happen, but then it happened.
They built up the anticipation.
I love Logan. I think that's
Logan's fantastic.
Great movie.
Well, but you're right. It was like a blow off valve for pressure building up. Like being a fan of X-Men in general and Wolverine and reading the comics, it's like then you see the movies and you're like, this is so pithy and toned down and toothless.
Sometimes they try to get away like where, oh, well, there's no blood, like where he stabs the guy through the foot.
Or the dude in the chest.
Yeah, that, yeah.
And like, but it's like teasing you. And then when Logan came out, it was just like,
it's like, well, this is our last chance. Prop, maybe, you know.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah,
that's a whole thing too, content wise, just how sensitive people have become with certain things, where I was seeing that they had taken Daredevil from Netflix and they moved it to Disney Plus, and then these mothers were very concerned that, oh, there's violent content mixed in with all the cartoons and all the Disney stuff. And I thought, man, like no matter what, we can never get away from like the discerning parent trying to keep their kid from just seeing something a little too rough. And then it dawned on me, I'm like, wait, like I'm 40 now. So these mothers are my age. So this is my generation saying the same stuff that like my mother's generation said. And I was like, oh wow, yeah, this is like this sort of concept of like purity.
Oh man, the number of things when I was a kid that other kids would say, oh man, when I'm older, I'll never do this. And I was just like, I kind of got a feeling that a lot of us are going to do it. Whatever we were talking about. It's really
just holding it back as long as possible, or not encouraging the wrong behavior. Like my mom, I have 4 sisters and I was raised by a single mom, and I was the only boy. She didn't know what to do with me. And so she had such an interesting take on violence in media, because me as a young boy who wanted to roughhouse and do all this stuff, she couldn't keep up with that. My sisters didn't care about any of that. But if I watch Rambo, or I watch an action movie, or I play a video game, then I get it out of my system. As long as it doesn't malform into, you know, me hurting small animals, or
that's
being
when
a
you
bully
really
at
need
school or something. So it's like there was always a sort of a threshold to it, which I thought was really interesting on her part. Maybe it was accidental.
I think my mom was really like mindful of that kind of thing. Like there was, in a lot of ways, I was pretty sheltered with the movies I was allowed to watch when I was a lot younger. But on the other hand, like, I mean, my mom bought me my first bow for archery, you know, like, and we were allowed to have toy swords and hit each other with sticks, you know, whatever.
Right.
It's
everybody had I mean, not everybody, but at least my generation, you had those phases. You see a movie and you immediately go out into the yard and grab whatever you can to be a Power Ranger, or be a Highlander, you know, whatever, and just fight each other.
I'm still in my Lord of the Rings phase. Never gonna die. I just did a marathon of all 3 of them again, like last month. So, I find that there's some films that the more I watch them, the more I fall in love with them. Where, like, for Lord of the Rings, it's so overwhelming, just the amount of stuff that's going on, like, with the story, and, like, you have the writing and the emotional side of it, but also just visually, there is so much in those things, and the first time you watch it, you can't even, like, comprehend what you're seeing. Yeah, it's like, even just, like, with what the people are wearing, you know?
Right.
And the more I watch it, the more that I'm able to kind of, like, I guess I say, take bigger bites of the image with my eyes and ears, you know, just to, like, I'm able to experience the films more and more the more I watch them. And not every movie, I don't have the same reaction to every movie I watch, right? You know, there's some that you watch them once and I'm like, man, I got it. That was enough, you know, but there's some films that the more I watch them, the more I appreciate them and realize even more, oh, wow, that I didn't even every time I watch those movies, I notice something substantial that I didn't before.
Yeah.
Are there any films that you watch where the more you watch them, the more you like them?
It's tricky, because I will say this, like, when you're on a film set and you're running takes, right, and you got the camera set up and you got this whole thing and all the work that you're talking about has been done and now it's time to capture it. It's like you are capturing sort of something that's going to be timeless forever. And so in that, it's like, it's really interesting that even with how chaotic it can be on set, to think that once this is all done and somebody watches it, they're going to have that effect. They're going to realize why it took 30 takes to get that one particular take or that one particular shot, because it's going to stay in your mind somewhere. And for me, I tend to watch things pretty thoroughly when I watch them, so my takeaway is a little more immediate. And then if I go back and watch something, it sometimes can actually diminish it. Mm-hmm. So I rarely watch movies more than once, unless it's something like I really enjoy, like Talladega Nights or something that's really quotable and funny, and I just want to see it again. I just want to relive that, that moment or something. But I can't say that I have that, and maybe that's part of just who I am. Like as a writer, I tend to watch movies and sort of pull them apart and figure out, like, okay, how did that moment happen? How do we build up to this heroic moment or this sad moment? And I'm like analyzing it. And then having worked in the industry now for like 12 years, I know how a lot of it's done. So it kind of demystifies it for me. And now I just watch things to see if I can get lost in them and if they can truly entertain me anymore without me being like, checking their continuity of their wardrobe or seeing if I can tell the difference between the green screen and the foreground and all that kind of stuff that just really gets to me. So,
yeah, I think, well, let's talk a bit more about this because you've done locations, AD and all that, but I want to talk about writing with you because I sense that there's like, that's where there's a passion there for that. The writing that you do, is that, do you write films that are similar to what maybe you that you like to watch, like whether it's genre or themes or anything?
I guess sometimes it's just filling a void. So I guess how do I collate this thought? When I have an idea for, so first of all, I'm not a genre writer. I don't write just one thing. So I'm not like Stephen King, and it's just mainly horror across the board. I tend to have an idea that is a sci-fi or a fantasy or a drama, and then I just pour everything into that one piece. And so that I feel that it's a really fleshed out version of that genre. And there's a lot of, it's tricky because you get inspired by a lot of things, but you don't want to copy. And so it's really about finding that weird little blind spot that no one else saw before. Whether it's, and I mean, I'll just, so I don't accidentally spoil anything, I'll just say Westerns. Like, I don't write any Westerns, right? But if I had this idea for a Western that nobody had done before, then I would be intrigued by that. And then I'd watch other Westerns and kind of get a feeling for that environment and maybe the language they use, because dialogue is a huge part. It's the hardest thing to me about writing, is to be presumptuous about every character you're writing. So I'm just one guy, but I have to write 15 other people. Yeah. And how they would have, like, who writes how people have conversations with each other. It's a really weird thought experiment. But if I find something that I feel exists that hasn't been done before, but still could be done well, not just done for the novelty of never been have been done before, then that's something that really intrigues me, and I put all my energy into that. So I jump around quite a bit. I've had ideas for things, I think, naturally, that could be a sequel. Like, I love Predator. I could do a Predator sequel, sure. Yeah. But oddly, that would be the thing I'd be less passionate about, because now I'm not a creator, I'm just a fan. And that's like a huge distinction for me. Yeah. Because I want to be someone who creates work, not just someone who is ingesting, whatever's been out there. So it's a very tricky line. If that satisfies your inquiry.
No, yeah, this is great, because this, like, I like the way and the amount of thought you put into this kind of thing. Like, it's very analytical of your own writing and comparing it to other stuff. So would you say that, let me just brass tack some of your method here. Like, do you write by, like, first draft? Okay. Like, or even maybe before that, when you're coming up with your story, all right, Are you writing a beat sheet first, or like bullet points, or do you start by typing it up, or are you writing by hand? Like, when does it actually? At what how do you start to make this a physical like script? Okay.
It's tricky because there are ways, not to be too eccentric about it, but
a writer being eccentric? Oh man, that's so.
Yeah. There's something that I heard before about the concept of ego, right? That I guess in Greek philosophy or something, ego wasn't something within you; it was something outside of you, and it was a little thing that they would talk about, and it would separate it from you. So if I was an arrogant person, it was because of this entity that was filling me with these ideas to be this way or whatever.
It's like a personification.
Something like that, yeah. And maybe ego is not the right one, but it's something to that effect where I feel like the stories come to me to be told. And this thing, or genius, not ego, genius.
Oh, right. Genius
is a separate entity that is outside of you, that is informing you and telling you to spread this message or do what you have. And so I kind of feel like the ideas come to me, and then they just kind of wind around in my head for a while. And then once they sort of coalesce into something useful, then I start to play with it. And it can happen in a lot of different ways. So I could, I'm just crazy. I'm just a crazy person. Because there are sometimes I'll hear a song, and that song makes me think of a concept, and then that concept leads me to a story. There's a fantasy series that I've been working on since I was 16. It's like a 10-part thing. It's massive. It's very big. All started because I liked a particular word. And I was like, oh, that's an interesting word. And I started playing with that concept of that word. And then it just started to unfold into something. And so then once things start to manifest, then it's a matter of just how you get it down. Like you were saying, the beat sheet or outlines or, I worked at a cafe when I lived in Los Angeles, and I'd get an idea in the middle of the day. And so I'd push a little button to feed out the receipt paper, rip it off, write the idea, and stuff it in my pocket. And then later I'd take all these receipts and I'd put them into a notebook.
Oh, okay.
And so just so they didn't escape.
Yeah, yeah.
And so there's a lot of different ways that it happens. And then you just get kind of a better memory about it. So, but something in terms of like something useful that if someone were to watch this and be like, why am I watching this guy talk about himself?
Don't even worry about that, man.
Well, no, I'm just saying a good takeaway. One of my favorite that I've heard, like I'm not a huge Judd Apatow fan, but he simply said once, get it down, then build it up, right? So you get it down, just get it out of your head, and then build it up. And treat your notebooks like a sketchbook, essentially. So you're not in there doing your finished product. You're in there trying to get the shapes and the lines right. And then when you're ready for the first draft, you've done all this other gross work. So like to give you an example, I just finished a script I've been working on for a couple of years now. It's a very emotional drama, and it's very heavy. And I wrote the entire thing by hand. And that's not to say that I sat down and I had a dedicated notebook and I wrote it. I would grab a piece of paper here, grab a notebook here, grab this. I had, and I would go to a bar and just write my ideas and just think about it. And then when it came time to write the script, I just had all these ideas and concepts. I was like, oh, great. Now I've got to find a through line to make this all make sense. And so I just started putting them in to a document and playing with it. And then I eventually was like, this is too chaotic. And so then I started over. And then when I started over, I started pulling things that I had collected in as I was telling the story. And it gave it a lot more flavor and a lot more value. Because when you're sitting and when you're inspired isn't necessarily when the moment hits you. It's when you say, okay, well, I'm not working this week, or I'm off this weekend and I really want to get some writing done. You may not be the most inspired, but on all those other times you were inspired, you take those little pieces and and it helps you on those days when you can fill up a document and feel really good about yourself getting, 10, 15, 20 pages done in a day or something crazy. So
Yeah, it's like some people will just sit, like they only will think about writing when they've sat down to do it. But I think it was Mozart would basically compose in his head, and then it wasn't until sometimes the morning of the premiere of whatever opera he had going on that he would quickly write out the sheet music for it, because he had it, like he knew what it was going to be,
Right.
but he would procrastinate on actually writing the music out onto paper, and then he'd throw that at the musicians and everybody, and they had to sight read it. It's
That's really fascinating.
yeah. It's he would, like, some people do that where they build it and then later they get it down.
And I'm like that. I'm a burst
Yeah.
writer. I'm not I'm not disciplined in that way of, like, if you're writing novels, they say to try to write so many pages a day, every day, no matter
Right.
what. Even if you don't use it, even if it's trash, it's just like going to the gym. You're exercising a muscle. I'm not that diligent about it. I'm a burst writer, so I just gather like that, and then I just throw it into something. And some things I've only ever typed on my computer, and I've never written anything by hand.
Do you
And
think
other
that
things
was
I
ever
have-
because of, well, those different methods where sometimes you've got ideas that are coming from the genius, and then notes or receipts that in notebooks versus typing up? Was there anything different about those projects that may have led to those different methods of writing?
That's a good question. It's probably just personal. I guess to put it in a different way, there are certain high concept ideas, especially dramas, things that are very sad or something like world building is insane. It's a very difficult process. And so you really kind of have to be like method about it in certain ways. So you have to kind of create a ritual for yourself. This is what I do, where I put myself in that place to churn out that stuff from me. And so I think part of that's more of when I have time to sit down and I have specific music I listen to, or I have, I'll drink a chai tea for this story, or I'll drink a coffee for this story. And that's more the ritual I set up for myself. But in the thing living in me throughout my day-to-day life, I mean, I did a lot of retail. I was a server. A big thing about, if you're a writer, you pay attention more than most people. You absorb things because, like, oh, that's an interesting character I could use. Oh, this old lady who was mean to me when I was a server, oh, she could play so and so's mother in this other thing. And so you're always collecting and collecting and collecting. And I think some of that collection, I mean, you collect a bunch of stuff you don't use. And I think some of the stories that have a lot more heft to them require me to kind of wring out all these experiences that I have and search through this whole database and then put it into some sort of like actual like physical form or something. If that makes sense. So basically to say it's always in me, but something can prompt it. And when something prompts it, I have to write it down. But if there's something I'm not as attached to, that's maybe just something fun, like a comedy, then I'm not gonna wring that out of myself. I'm just gonna sit and be like, all right, I'm in the mood, and just write that. So it's just I think if the more personal it is, or the more overwhelming it is, the more it just sort of kind of fires off in random directions. So that's the thing about just me in general, just even my friends. Like, a lot of people haven't read my stuff. They don't really know that I'm a writer. And if they do, they don't really know my ideas. But behind my eyes, there's always 5 or 10 stories going around. But then I have to go to work and shake hands and be like really pleasant and be in a podcast and, that kind of stuff. But it's like the duck on the water, right? It's like, it seems smooth, but underneath it's all business, all business.
That's
so funny. It's just a matter of how I capture these things and then organizing them is its own thing. So, but
and even stuff that, well, one of the things you mentioned is, like, even sometimes, like, you don't use everything you come up with, but even that is still helpful because you're still writing and you're still engaging with creativity. And it's not even like, you know, maybe there's a funny line that just doesn't make it into the script you're working on all the time. And sure, that might end up being used somewhere else at some point. But I used to get so frustrated that I would write all these scripts and realize while I'm writing them, this is never going to get made. Mm-hmm. And even I wouldn't make this because there's other ideas I have that I like more than this one. But for some reason, I'm writing it right now. And eventually, over time, I realized, yeah, well, I was basically lifting weights for writing, doing that. It's like I'm still doing it and getting better at that thing. And I mean, I enjoyed it. It was fun.
But there is a little, there's more theater or performance to it. It's kind of, have you ever done martial arts?
Yes.
So how you learn katas, but you're never going to use a kata, really, when you're fighting. But you're just going through the motions and learning block and kick and punch and all that kind of stuff. And then once you're actually in a fight, you're not going to be like straightening your belt and getting ready.
Horse stance. No.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Unless you're good at it, unless it's your style. But yeah, it's that kind of thing. You have to do a little more to get that one little. It's like.
And in a lot of ways, when you're that's a great analogy too, because kata is perfect practice, and it's the way that you're even doing your blocks wouldn't necessarily look that similar to how you might actually block a strike. All right, but yeah, if you're when you're writing, it's the same thing where when you are writing, let's say you're commissioned to write a script or something, there's going to be restrictions coming at you that you have to
there's that too,
adjust to. But when you're writing on your own, that lets you really work on the, I don't know if perfection is the right word, but you have this ability to, it's the difference between, having a fight in the street versus practicing in the studio. The studio might not look realistic, it might not look practical, but it is helpful to a real world situation.
It's also safer, right? So
yes, that too. You don't want to get
when you're by yourself and you're creating something, you're not really up against anything. And I think you made an interesting point in there about that, where it's like then you take it out to people who may read it or want to make it, or say you are making it and you get certain actors attached and they want to make their changes, or a certain studio wants to make their changes. And so it's like all that perfect practice that you did by yourself to make sure your story arcs were good and that you have a proper first, second, and third act and all the, technical stuff. Once it gets out into the world and it's not safe anymore, it just gets beat up. Yeah. And so you have to, that's something where, I wish I had a little more practice on that creatively, because that is a really interesting challenge for your mind. And so I just finished a screenplay. I sent it out to like 15 people and I'm waiting to get, criticism back. And that's like a weird position to put yourself in. Like, oh yeah, this means a lot to me. Hey, rip it apart.
Right.
And some people pull punches and they don't want to hurt you. And other people are way too brutal. And some are indifferent, which is actually
some people
worst.
Just want to rewrite your script too.
Yes.
It's not even like this is improving it. It's just different sometimes. Like it's there's all kinds of feedback, and being able to take notes is a very useful ability.
Because honestly, something that I think that has kind of hurt some of the industry is that certain people get into a position and they're the writer, director, or whatever, and no one's allowed to tell them no. And so then they make something completely unchecked, and it doesn't feel the same.
Yeah, it's really a shame, because you hear about the executives in studios like, oh, they're messing stuff up and they're not in touch with the art or whatever. But then you have this filmmaker who, fought, blood, sweat, tears, all that to get their film done, and it's awesome. And then finally they get the chance to do whatever they want. And sometimes it's cats, and or something, which I got to say, because no one else says it, Tom Hooper is still a great filmmaker. I know he's known as the Cats guy, but he made the John Adams HBO series, which is amazing. Guy made The King's Speech. His niche for me is historical dramas, and he does them better than almost anybody, and I hope he gets back to directing soon. So, Tom, I know you've gotten a lot of hate out there, and I hope you see this. I think you're really great, and you've earned at least one film that has gotten the reception it has, as far as just like, hey, you can have one that people don't like. Please come back, make historical dramas for me, if no one else. All right. Anyway, so
no, it's great.
He's
PSA.
Yeah, totally.
It's like, what if Christopher Nolan made Flubber, and you're like, okay, well, I just
wow, this guy must be terrible.
I did it
all
for my
of a sudden.
kids, or whatever.
Yeah, I think there's some filmmakers that when I see they have a trajectory or career where they keep making stuff, if they make a bad one or one that I don't like, right, or that isn't as good, I just kind of think, you know what? Yeah, okay, so not everybody's filmography is perfect,
right?
If you've made more than one feature film that's good, that's insane to me.
Well, there's also an element of creative control too. So it's like,
Yeah.
if you're the type of director that gets to that point where you're allowed to make what you want to make, then great.
Yeah.
But a lot of people,
And even those people don't get to make everything they want to make.
Right.
Like Scorsese spent, I think, like 30 years trying to get The Irishman made. And you think his pitch was, hey, Al Pacino and, Robert De Niro and everybody else in that film already wanted to be in it. He's like, hey, we'll get this whole team together and I'll direct, and no one wanted it, which blows my mind. But
it's very strange.
Yeah,
but it happens, and things fall through the cracks, or
yeah.
people write things they're passionate about, and then they put them in a drawer, and they never get to see the light of day. So,
would you ever write something that you would not want to have produced?
Oh, interesting.
Intentionally, I mean, not like you write in, you look back, oh, this is awful, it's from a long time ago and I'm so much, but not like that, but like
I'll say, from my position as someone who hasn't yet become what I deem to be officially a writer, in that I haven't sold my own work or been able to produce or direct my own content, or whatever you call it now, that where I'm at right now, I'd prefer not to work on things that would further keep me from doing my own things. But if I had a few, and I had 2 or 3 under my belt, and I felt, okay, cool, like, I'm established as me, as a writer, as this whatever style, sure, I'll go do this other stupid thing, and probably more so if it was like in the comedy realm, because that to me is a little less precious. But if it was something like, I don't know, I just had to think of the gigs I've worked on in my life. Like, did I want to work on Dance Moms for an entire season as a PA? No, but it was money when I needed money, and so
I had to. You must have so many stories, man.
it is what it is.
Yeah.
But it's so yeah. Would you prefer? Sure, but if you're hungry and you need money, then you're gonna do kind of whatever. So that's actually what I'm trying to avoid right now, is because I work on a lot of things that I don't watch. And so if I were to put myself out there as a writer, then what happens if I end up in the writing room for one of these shows that I'm working on that I don't want to watch, just to have a gig, or just to have something? And it's a little frightening. Be like, I don't want to contribute to more bad content. Yeah. And there's a lot of things out there that people seem to blame the writers for, which is kind of weird. Like with studio things, like, Marvel, Star Wars, it's like when something comes out and they don't like it, they're like, oh, the writing was bad. But it's like, no, there's a whole other system in there that's not just the writing. It's like the toys they want to sell, or the political leanings they might have shifting back and forth. There's a lot more infused into that, and then the writers get kind of a bad rap. Like they're the ones with the power to like create something like that. They may come up with the idea, but they don't ultimately have the power.
It's almost like writing a screenplay is, you could equate it to ballistics. It's like you start on this end and you try to fire your screenplay out there with, considering, the wind or whatever, and the other stuff to try and get to the target. of it and make a big enough bang, I suppose. But like, because some writers will talk about, like really experienced writers will talk about how they write certain things to like have the system in mind. Where one guy said, the first thing I wrote, I talked about how this character jumps into the water and you see them go into the water, and someone took me aside and was like, you shouldn't write that way for the budget that we have for this project, because we're going to need so many different changes of clothes. It's going to take them that, like, you're going to need multiple takes, and you're going to have to do this, and we're going to have to, like, aside from have an underwater unit and all this stuff. And he was like, oh, I never really thought about that.
Oh my gosh.
You know, he didn't have the experience for it. And that's just one of a billion things, versus Todd Phillips talking about Joker and saying he saw emails from executives saying, doesn't this guy understand that we sell pajamas at Target with the Joker on them? And he was like, well, maybe we shouldn't make the film for the pajamas, you know. But on the other hand, it's like, if you have a animation studio like Illumination, who, you know, makes Despicable Me and all that, they've gotten from some animators that I know a reputation for making stuff that's just for selling pajamas and bed sheets and all plushy toys. But they've built a lot of that up, and they made the Mario movie, and which I enjoyed quite a lot. The animated one, I was like, this is about as good as I think a Mario movie is gonna be. It had a lot of care and artistry to it. The story was fine. It was a great family film, you know, and it was something that didn't seem encumbered by how it was being, you know, doing things for the fans, but like it fit really well, and it seemed like a different kind of film that production company has made, because I think they've had the success so far to be able to get, you might say, more creative, or I don't know. But it's like the Beatles like started off by saying, I want to hold your hand. It's like they were a bit of a boy band. It was a while before they had the ability to do I Am the Walrus and the stuff that is what they're known for now. If they started with
that, then it wouldn't work as well.
Right.
It's like, there's a lot of... No, marketability is a thing that a lot of people don't really account for. Mm-hmm. Because it is the film industry. It's not, you know, it's not necessarily a fine art in that respect. In a lot of cases, like if you see the credits at the end of a movie, that's hundreds, even thousands of people that all have to be fed from this thing you just watched. And so it has to reach a broad enough market, and it has to do well overseas, mm-hmm. and, you know, from an American perspective. So it's like marketability is a huge thing that a lot of purists don't really want to accept sometimes. Mm-hmm. Even I don't was it M. Night Shyamalan, like when he first came out, he did Sixth Sense and then Unbreakable, and Unbreakable is a great movie.
I really enjoy that movie a lot.
He paid his dues by writing Stuart Little.
Yeah.
You know, and then and he played the game, he played the corporate mm-hmm. game and made something for them, and then they were like, okay, great, thanks, you know, you scratched our back, now you want to do this little movie about a kid who can see ghosts? Like,
you can have 1 or 2 stars in it, you know, put a bit of a budget,
right.
And it ended up being
and now
huge.
He's like a name, mm-hmm. and he's got a style and all this stuff, but you know, if he didn't do Stuart Little, would we have heard about him, or would it have taken him 10 more years? Mm-hmm. It's that kind of thing. So if, like, even with my own ideas, like, there's a market for them. There's someone who wants to watch it. And I think a lot of people get too masturbatory in their own ideas, where they're like, no, but this is just like so cool or so amazing, or, you know, whether it's avant-garde or it's like super gory horror. Like, there's obviously, you know, a market for everything, even porn. I mean, porn sells like crazy. But when it comes to making something like just that the general public will talk about for decades, then that's something important to consider. You can't just write every movie for yourself, which is why a lot of writers I've met and that I've heard of, they all, pretty much everybody, their first screenplay is some sort of weird biography.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you are a writer, have you done this as well, but I've definitely done it, where they say, write what you know, write what you know. And instead of learning more to know more, they just stick with what they already have and say, oh, I'll just write about me.
Yeah.
And so,
or they don't get, in a weird way, they don't get out of movies, some of them, where it's like they'll get in. It's great to be inspired by cinema. Like, I think you have to be, probably, but when you have people sometimes who all of their films are just inspired by, oh, I watched this movie and I really liked that, so now I want to make a movie, which is great. There's nothing wrong with that.
right.
But it's like, well, what's your movie going to be about? Is it going to be about the movie you just saw? Is
Right.
it just derivative?
Spiritual sequel or...
Right. And that's
Yeah.
why Chuck Jones, who did like all the Warner Brothers animations for Bugs Bunny, Daffy Duck, and Roadrunner and all that, I know a guy who like made the definitive documentary on him, and he said Chuck never talked about animation, like ever. He said he was the most well-read person I had ever met. He had warehouses of storage units full of books he had read. And he would talk about everything except animation. He was like, once you got the basics of the animation stuff down and you can do it, he's like, then I'm going to go learn about ballet or opera or physics or whatever, which is how he's able to make classics like What's Opera Doc, the short Kill the Wabbit, Kill the Wabbit. It's like, yeah, well, he knew what Wagner's operas were. And if he didn't, you can't make that, It's like, so there's so much about getting, like, and sometimes, being intentional about getting inspiration from a diverse array of sources, I think.
Kind of like what I was saying earlier.
Yeah,
about how
just...
you collect... I
walk
collect
through life,
people and personalities. And, I have a very eclectic friend group, always have. But I'm not much of a reader.
Interesting.
So,
okay.
I'm not really one to sit down because it's the crushing guilt of like wanting to manifest something, and so you kind of look at your time and you say, well, I could sit and read a book, or I could sit and work on one of my stories that I should be finished with by now, but I keep screwing around and doing other things. And so if I can sit down and do that sage thing, I should probably do it in a different way. And so also when I read, I'll get a chapter or two in and be like, meh, not really into it, and put it off to the side. So if I read, it's for education. It's not for
recreation
or imagination. Yeah, it's something I'm going to walk away from this book having learned something with self-help or philosophy or I'd read a book about the Zodiac cover to cover before I
That's interesting you say you're not much of a reader when you're talking about, The Art of War, and like you referenced a bunch of
I learned from
writers.
It didn't inspire me.
Gotcha.
And so it's a matter of you just sort of collect all these things to try to find your own, put a needle on your compass, essentially. And so you, but yeah, creatively, I have enough of my own ideas that I don't really, again, I'm a creator, not a fan. So like, I like Lord of the Rings, never read Lord of the Rings. And the real kicker is that my mother, for the first like 15, 17 years of my life, owned a bookstore. Oh. And so I grew up in the bookstore. I was actually a home birth, physically born in a bookstore in Central PA.
Oh, wow.
And so I spent my whole life around books. But to me, it was like inventory, because you move it here and you move it there, and you have this on sale, and then you go to this flea market and you set up a stand, and it was surrounded by books all the time.
Yeah.
And I never, not never, but I wouldn't gravitate to every single book on the shelf. I'd gravitate to something that I was like, oh, I could learn something about myself or about other people. But as far as big grand stories, like aside from like required reading in high school, like I haven't really read that much. So, and some people say you have to read to write, and that's probably why I don't write novels and I write screenplays, because it's the difference between that and like comic books. It's much more visual. It's a whole different format. It's a lot more, because I'm very shapes and colors, not words and sentences in the way that I am anyway. So I gravitate towards things conceptually not literally, like literally in literature.
Mm-hmm.
So,
do you read screenplays?
I have, yeah.
No.
They're interesting. It's a weird format. Sometimes it's very dry.
Yeah.
So it's very technical, but I have to read them for work, and so, which inherently, as I'm reading them, I think what's interesting about a screenplay is that, at least in my experience, when you're holding a screenplay, that means that it hasn't been made yet, and you can still have an opinion, and something could change.
Mm-hmm.
So when I'm reading a screenplay, even on a show that I'm working on, I'm like, if I made a note, we wouldn't shoot that way today. But if you're reading a novel, there's nothing that's going to change that novel.
It's done, yeah.
It's done.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very interesting because the screenplay is basically just like a technical document for all the departments to rip apart and do their schedule and do their breakdowns and do all this other stuff. And on the day, something could change. The weather could be wrong, or an actor could be hurt, or, whatever. So it's like the screenplay is malleable in its essence, which I find kind of interesting. So when I do read them, there's a part of me that's like, I don't like this dialogue. They could change this. They could do this. But at least in my line of work that I do for my bread and butter, I just look at the locations and where they're going to film so we can go scout them and secure them and all that. But me as a writer reading this, I'm like looking at the story and whether it's engaging or if the dialogue really like is authentic to me or is interesting to me. So it's interesting. So yes, I do, but it's a weird experience.
Yeah, I'm glad you clarified that as well. So when you're writing that, because we've talked a lot about how the script changes and all that.
Mm-hmm.
I started writing because I wanted to make a film, right? And then over the years, I actually became a writer, I guess, and like did the writing for the sake of the writing, as opposed to just a means to an end, First and foremost, a director, absolutely. But there's plenty of things that I've written or been a part of writing that I didn't really even have a hand in making beyond the written word, which is a weird experience that I enjoy. But for you, we see that your direction that you're going with is, and what you're most interested in, it seems, is writing. How do you think about or feel about the idea of when you do write a screenplay? Is it your intention to produce or direct these yourself, or are you planning on handing them off to other people? And if so, how do you feel about like knowing that things are going to change from the thing that you spent all this time and energy into? So like, because that's something I've always been intrigued by people who are primarily writers, is it's like you're writing something that is not going to be like that.
Right.
How do you engage?
Sacrificial lambs. You got to kind of, the way I've perceived it is I have certain things that I love and I want to maintain their integrity. And there are certain things that I've written where I'm just like, screw it. If it gets me $100,000, whatever, have it, do whatever you want with it. Whatever, gets my name out there. And so there are some pieces that I've written that I'm not married to in that way, but there are others that it would hurt me quite a bit. In fact, in my early 20s, I lived in Los Angeles, and I had written a few things while I was out there, and a production company reached out because they wanted to buy the rights to one of my stories, and it was a very important story that I liked a lot. And I looked at the company and I looked at the people running it, and they were offering me some money for it. And I definitely needed money because I was, on my own and broke all the time.
In Los Angeles.
In Los Angeles, especially. And it was difficult because I could have just sold the thing off and they could have made it or never made it, or it could be sitting on a shelf to this day. People
do that all the time.
Yeah. It's,
my screenplay got bought. Oh, they're going to make it. And they own it to not make it sometimes.
Yeah, to keep you out of the market.
Mm-hmm.
So to keep the audience focused on something specific. So it's tricky. And I hadn't made that call to not go through with it, and was one of the last things I did before I moved from LA because I was just like, screw it. I don't want to deal with this right now. I'm going to go somewhere, much more comfortable to live, like Pittsburgh, and lick my wounds, and then I'll go back and deal with them later.
So you do want to return?
No.
Okay.
No, not a big fan of Los Angeles. Right. The vibe, the busyness, I don't know. Are you from there?
No.
Am I offending you somehow?
Not even a little bit. I'm from Texas originally, and but I am a Pittsburgher, and I'm a Texan, but Pittsburgh's my city, and I look forward to going to California someday.
Sure.
I would love to, and a lot of it's because I do want to go to LA to experience being there. I don't, at this point in my life, I never want to live there. And I have never met anybody who has ever been to LA who's just like, man, it's great there. I love it. It's just the people, the food, it's like I don't hear great things about being there, and maybe it's because I don't know. But you're not offending me at all. I'm glad they're part of the union, and all that stuff. Thanks for being a part of the America. But yeah, it's not,
It's a necessary evil. Like, Hollywood had to happen a certain way, and we're all glad that it did for the most part. But there's a lot of like theater and pomp and circumstance, and dog and pony shows in LA where it's like, you have to live that way all the time. And it's difficult because if you want to kind of keep that piece of your soul and your originality, it's hard when you go to a place where it's just like you're surrounded in billboards. Like when I was out there, and that's in the people, because when I was out there, I said, people don't want you to know them here. They want you to believe them.
Jeez.
And it was very hard to get close to people because I was there like, okay, everyone's artistic and authentic, and you got all these great musicians and artists and things, and then you meet the general person there, and they're all it's all a veneer, and it's very difficult. And then when I came back to Pennsylvania, I was really grateful because you could be standing in line to get a cup of coffee, and it could be a long line, and you just make conversation with the person next to you.
Yeah.
I would do that in LA, and they'd be like, I don't know you. Why are you talking to me? And it's like, oh, well, that's kind of strange.
Yeah, that's when I go there, I'll, form my own opinion, I'm sure, but that's what I hear a lot.
It's unfortunate. And they also say like,
no one likes that, right? I mean,
well, it's weird.
Yeah. It's like I've heard so many stories of someone saying, oh yeah, I was at like a party or a mixer or whatever it was, and somewhere, could have been just the bar, and once the person they're talking to realizes that, oh, you can't help me with the thing I'm trying to do, they won't even say, hey, nice talking to you. Sometimes they'll just turn around and find somebody else. Right. And I'm like, yikes, man.
But ironically, they call everyone their friend. They're like, oh yeah, that's my friend, and that's my friend, and that's my friend.
Well, because if your friend's a big deal, oh well, I'm friends with that person who did that.
It's all about who you know, and it's like, no, because and that always bothered me, because my attitude is like, a friend will drive you to the airport, a friend will help you move,
jump your car.
Yeah, exactly. help you change a tire. Like a friend will actually just do something for you as a friend. Yeah. It's not a constant back and forth, tit for tat. And it gets so transactional, but I mean, it is the place to be to develop things, and
that's where it happens. A lot.
Yeah.
Well, and it's definitely been the industry. I think has in a lot of ways spread out. There's more stuff being made in Pittsburgh, I guess, but it's still.
But it's not. It's like, made here.
Well, sometimes it's you're right.
But
sometimes
it's
shot here, but it's like it's really made in LA. Like that is the fortress.
And that's a whole other can of worms, is the industry and development,
even
and
like with
pre-production hell and things like that. With I'm in a union. I work with a bunch of people. We've worked on dozens and dozens and dozens of things but we've not developed one single thing. And it all gets prepped and shopped and organized, and then once it lands in a town, it could be because maybe they really like the town, or it's because of the tax credit, or for whatever reason, or the studio that they wanted in this particular part of Atlanta wasn't available, but it's cheaper to go to Pittsburgh, so we'll just do that. And it's like there's a whole different development arm, and then once it lands somewhere and they shoot it, it's not like Night of the Living Dead, where it was just like homegrown here. It's everything is brought here to be made.
Yeah. Even a lot of independent films still get their, if they get to a point of distribution, a lot of that ends up being through places, organizations that are based in LA. So even if you do a grassroots thing somewhere, a lot of the time it ends up still like you're still going through the system there, and
well, even with the way they put out timelines, like for Marvel movies, and they say, well, September of 2025 we're going to release this movie, and you're like, whoa, you just know this, you just know that because you've got it down to such a system. You're like,
it's a factory.
We'll writing whatever, and then we'll produce it, and we'll churn it out, and we'll do the thing, and then we'll edit it, and then we'll market it, and then it will release on this day. And they just have it down, and then that's part of the industry. And it was so fascinating the first time I heard a timeline like that, where I was like, whoa, here I am with a bunch of ideas, like, man, I really hope one of them gets made, and it could take a year or two to actually do it. And they're like, here's 10 movies over the next 3 years, and we know exactly what day we're going to drop them. It's like it's such a massive
one
world.
of the things that really made an impact on my mentality with stuff over the past 3-4 years or so was a quote. I think it's attributed to MacArthur, but I don't know that this is his quote, right? Which is, he's talking about, doing war and all that, but hey, art of war, it's applicable to everything, right? So he said, amateurs think of tactics and professionals think of logistics. And it's like, you got people, oh, well, I'm going to have my troops go around this way and go up there. And he's like, how am I going to get 12,000 tanks into the Philippines? It's like, and I was like, that's kind of, because you are right. Film has always been an industry, and it's, and part of that's a good thing,
Sure.
but it's also, and I think
I think there's a lot more to it, that it also kind of affects the world, because people,
like cinema does, or, what does,
because we love our idols, right? It's like we live in the age of celebrity, so everyone's a king or queen or prince or princess in our mind, or an influencer, and it's like, but they're just the person on the Wheaties box, right? They're the athlete in the moment that helps sell more cereal. It's like they take the actor. I mean, granted, there's super talented people, but the whole idea that they can just jam somebody into a movie and say, "Oh, Robert Downey Jr.'s in it," and people are like, "Oh, I like that guy. I'll watch that movie." It's like, that's the way this game has been played for so long. And the general people, like, because I work in the industry and I have a lot of people that are friends of mine, and they still fall for the same things. Like I go out and I scout locations, and they like, I'm a location scout, a thing you might have heard of that is in a movie, in the movie business, right? It's like people will think I'm a director. They think I'm a producer. They think I'm the writer. And I'm like, I'm the one knocking on your door to see if we can film at your house. But you think, just because you have such a limited understanding of that whole world, you think that the director came to talk to you specifically? Like, that's not how any of that works.
Yeah.
So it's really interesting how easily it manipulates everybody, because they just see the finished product, they just see their actors, they just see whatever in front of them, and even people in our own industry don't quite understand all the how many wizards behind how many curtains there are to get to that final frame or that thing. And it's like, it's really it's bad. It's kind of, I don't know what to do with it, but it's just, it's worrisome to me.
It's not even just the film industry. I think having a, general literacy for media, would be immensely helpful, because you're right. It's, whether it's a marketing or a manipulation or both or whatever, there's
Photoshop people. If you've never physically sat down and and edited your own Photoshop document, then you could fall for any picture you see if you're just
of you too.
Yeah, and then go deeper with deep fakes. And it's like, if you don't understand all those things, then it's like you're vulnerable to whatever they want to do with that to you. And I'm not trying to be paranoid or anything. It's just well,
I mean, there are people who, whether well-intentioned or not, do try to have their work create some type of impact. And sometimes that will be on a personal level, or they want to make societal change with their film, or be a part of some kind of movement. My topic in that I've been just chewing on lately is when art imitates life versus life imitating art, or trying to affect real life by creating art that is idealistic or trying to has an agenda, just like huge topic,
Well, no, it's massive.
Yeah, but that's what I think about if the electricity goes out lately, as I say. Well,
right. Yeah, once you start peeling back the layers, it's kind of fascinating.
Now, real quick, just to say something that I think is cool about California, because I did dunk on it a bit.
National parks are great.
National parks are great. Also, there's something, believe it or not, that a lot of Californians have in common with a lot of Texans, which I think is for the same reason, which is Texans, even on this podcast, like I might say, oh, I'm a Pittsburgher, but I'm from Texas, or what a lot of Californians do the same thing. Like, oh, I'm a Californian, but I live out here right now, or I live out here, but I'm originally from California. And I think it's because both states at one point were their own country, and like for different lengths of time, but I think there is a cultural identity there, which being a Texan myself, I appreciate that in my fellow Californians. So, but it's
a feather in your cap for sure. That's, I mean, it's in some ways it's like name dropping. If I know Brad Pitt, and I'll let you know. But if I'm from California and I'm in Pittsburgh, I'm gonna let you know. It's like, it's just name dropping to remind.
Interesting. I never thought of it that way, but yeah.
Because I went to high school in Phoenix, and then I moved to LA, and I came. But I've always say I'm from Pennsylvania, and now I just happen to be in Pennsylvania while being from Pennsylvania. But when I lived in Phoenix or Los Angeles, I was like, I live in California, but I'm from my home, and if you feel that that's where you come from, because then it's like how people say that they're from Pittsburgh, but they live like an hour away. Yeah. They want to track to the closest relatable point that they
can. It also makes for a shorter conversation. It's, oh, where are you from? Oh, this, oh, where's that? And they just, it doesn't matter. Like Pittsburgh.
Yeah, exactly. I'm from 84. 84? You can name a town after it. Yeah, don't worry about it. It's a whole thing. Pittsburgh. I'm just from Pittsburgh. I'm from a small town called Jersey Shore in central PA. And that's the most confusing thing ever. And then the MTV show came out and made my life hell.
Oh, geez. So, sorry.
I have an interesting thing about what you said earlier about the lines on the page, and the magnitude that they have, because it is kind of a funny thing. This could be off book or whatever.
Keep going.
When there's a weird responsibility, because when you're creating something, you're writing, you're just doing it in your own way, just get it out. But when you go to like actually film the thing, like I worked on Jack Reacher as a production assistant.
Oh, I enjoyed that
when it filmed here.
Yeah.
And we filmed for weeks on end to film the car chase sequence.
To be clear, the film or the show?
I'm sorry, the film.
Cool.
Yeah.
Tom Cruise. Right.
Yeah.
Nice.
Part 1, actually, because there's 2.
Yeah.
But yeah, Jack Reacher, when it was filmed in Pittsburgh, I worked on that movie, and primarily as a second unit PA, doing lockups, making sure people were safe while they did the car chase sequence all around the city. It took weeks to film what turns into a small sequence.
Yeah.
And there are times where I worked on something in Atlanta, and it was drone follows car, shoots up downtown neighborhood, then crashes into parking garage or something for Fast and Furious 7. And it was like one sentence took us 2 weeks to do. And it's like, if you just change the the sentence, then it would be a lot tighter. But they allow for that, and it's a really interesting magnitude that just one statement, or just say so and so gets attacked by a gorilla. Then you're like, well, now I got to get a guy in a suit, or I've got to get an animal wrangler, like you were saying earlier about throwing somebody into the water. It's like that's a whole second unit thing. What time of year are we doing this? All that kind of stuff. And I think there's a lot of power in what you write that could be altered and still tell the same story in certain ways. But it does add a weird pressure once you're aware of it. So now when I'm writing, having done logistics and movies for so long, I'll write something and be like, maybe I should not do it that way because that's going to cost $200,000. So let's see if there's a way around it. Or if it's that kind of movie, it's already going to have that kind of budget, or it's a really good like crown jewel sequence for the third act or something, then keep it and just blow your money. That's just what they do. But when you're doing indies, you kind of, you'll write, oh, it's so-and-so's house. And then we're at this bar. Then we're at this diner. Then we're driving in the car. And it's like, all right, well, let's cut down the driving stuff because that can be unsafe and costly and time consuming to put the rigs on the different ways you want for different angles. But if you need it, you need it. But if this conversation could happen in a controlled environment at a diner, that's better than in a car. But the diner, then which diner? Because then you have to buy them out and you don't have any money. So maybe not a diner, maybe a bar. Maybe you shoot at the bar during the day so that at night they can be open, but during the day they can let you film there. Cool. It's in a bar, not in a diner, not in a car. And it's like that. It really can affect the whole landscape of your movie if you're truly trying to do something on your own for a budget in that way. Because there's a lot of things people just don't consider.
Yeah, absolutely. We had set designer, production designer, she's done all kinds of things. And she talked a bit about that where, you might have a scene that's maybe it's not one of the, it's not one of the bigger beats in the story, we'll say, but it might be set in this really grandiose location, and sometimes a part of her job can be, talking about the script with the, rest of the team and saying, hey, so do we really want this big build to be this scene where someone like hands off a file, or do we want to like shift that to the big fight, at the end or whatever it is. So yeah, because that's where it can just balloon out of control. Or even in, I think it's good sometimes when that does happen with action sequences, like in Fellowship of the Ring, The Mines of Moria. In the script, it just says like the Fellowship runs down some stairs. And then ended up being one of the biggest action sequences in the first movie of them like going down the stairs, but then they're getting shot at and then rocks are falling and the stairs are falling apart. It's this crazy thing. But even up through them doing that, they never went and rewrote it.
Right.
It's still the screenplay, like the shooting script of it. It says like the Fellowship runs down some stairs, ended up being crazy. And it's a wonderful moment in the film. But, but
again, that's what I mean. A script is malleable. It's just a technical document that people use to get an idea of how to do their job. It's not like a Bible. And so it's kind of interesting. I don't know. I don't know why I want to just demystify people so often.
I love inside baseball.
Just to like,
anything.
Take it down a notch. Because even, scheduling, as an assistant director, when you schedule movies, you have to look at, we work in pages. We don't work necessarily in days. And so it's like, we're doing 3 pages today. We're doing 5 pages today. And I don't know any other industry that does pages as part of their scheduling. But you get an eighth of a page, just a scene heading and one line, like you're talking about, like going down the stairs and one simple action. And that eighth of a page could be massive. I mean, it could be, William Wallace faces off against the British Army. It's like, oh yeah, pish posh. It's just an eighth of a page, but that's going to take weeks. It's like, it's kind of interesting. I don't know. There's a lot of directions to come at it.
Well, I wanted to talk a bit about that. Do you enjoy the role of being an assistant director?
I do. And if you don't know what it is, it's not as glamorous as it can sound, because if I tell my mom like, oh yeah, I was an assistant director, and then it's like, I can go two ways, because they hear the word assistant and it's like, well, if assistant is first, then it's important. If it's second, then it's less important. So I'm not the director's assistant. I don't get him coffee. I don't handle his phone calls or get his dry cleaning, but I assist the director in that, you know, they have their particular vision or what have you, and they direct the actors, and I just sort of help to tee things up on a schedule that makes sense so that they can competently get their work done within the time frame that they have. So I will say, we're going to do this scene on Monday and this scene Tuesday, and then these scenes on Wednesday, and basically just sort of set up the dominoes for them to knock them down, essentially. That doesn't mean I have control over everyone on the film set, but I at least try to help give them sort of a needle on their compass. Give them a target to aim at and just say, this is what we're doing Monday, so let's do all the prep we need to do for that, and and have all those conversations, and not bother the director with every single conversation that has to happen about where the trucks are parking and when the stunt rehearsals are happening and when's lunch. You know, it's like they're there to focus on the vision of it, and the assistant directors take on the logistics, especially on the day and the days to come, to just sort of lighten their load as it is. But I'm not talking to the actors and giving them direction or anything. I think the most directing that assistant directors do with talent is with background actors, like extras, and say, okay, you're going to grab your drink and you're going to walk through the party that way when I tap you on the shoulder. And that's about it. But it's not really like a very creative job. And it isn't even necessarily a job that leads you to director.
That's right.
And so it's kind of interesting that you can work your way up the ranks and become a first AD, the top assistant director. And that would make you a better like line producer or producer, because you understand the inner workings of the logistics and all the people moving around. Like, it's funny that you bring up Lord of the Rings so much, because the way I describe my job sometimes to people in the locations department, not necessarily as an AD, is when I watch a movie that has hundreds of people roaming around in costumes, I just say, where did they park? Like, where did they all park? How many bathrooms did we have to have access to? How many costumers were there getting them dressed? Like, what was the catering situation? Like, that's the kind of stuff that that I'm kind of used to.
I wonder that with, like, whenever I watch Lawrence of Arabia, I've just been like, how do you take care of that many camels? Like, how do you do it? Like, what do you, like, or horses or what? I'm like, all these, how early did these people have to get up to all get into wardrobe and costume? Like, you know,
something they've been doing in
all these have to be fed.
Yes. Yeah, maintained, and they can't make a lot of noise, and they have to behave, and or you know, like, just drug them all. I don't know. It's not ethical, but no, it's like in these Star Wars shows that they have been coming out with. Every time I see a group of stormtroopers, I'm like, maybe 5 of them are actual people. I know the rest are mannequins, and they're probably tiled digitally or something. And so it's like,
even the old ones, they had the matte paintings where it's like 12 of them are real or something, and then there's like 1,000 in the hangar.
Yeah, exactly. But Lord of the Rings, I know, was more authentic because I've seen documentaries about it, behind the scenes things. But you know, them making the chainmail and all this sort of stuff, so it's like kind of crazy. But
and even with that, that was such a massive project that you didn't just have, you know, I mean, you have a director and you have an assistant directors, but that had multiple units that all had their own directors, where Peter Jackson wasn't on set when they were filming something and someone else was directing it. Now, of course, he had his department meetings and, you know, directed them to say, hey, here's what we're going for, which is why it has a unified look throughout. But just that level of administration kind of made me wonder, do I ever want to make something that big? Because what I love is being on set. And I mean, I love every step of the process, right? I love being in pre-production and principal photography and post, but it's
I like the rap parties.
the rap parties are also fun, you know.
When everything's done.
If you get to go to a festival, that's a blast, you know. Like I love all of it, but you know, the idea of someone else shooting the movie that I'm directing, you know, like for a scene or something, I'm like, but I want to do that. But it's like, yeah, well, if it's that big,
well, yeah, then
you know,
outsource. And,
then it's like,
well,
unless you want to
art
take
form.
7 years to make the thing, you know.
Well, right.
And yeah, that as well. It's collaborative.
It's not like music where you could, you know, be like Trent Reznor with Nine Inch Nails and just, I'll do the keys today and I'll do the drum track and then I'll do the guitar and there's my song and that's my band is me, but in all these different ways. It's like, it's not like that in film where it's like, a lot of people think that, oh, this director, oh, they did everything.
They're an auteur.
Yeah. It's like, no, they look at, you know, people audition things to them and they say, that one. And then they go make that one. And then that one becomes the costume for whatever. Yeah. And so there's a lot of people that you're around that help you. I worked on a Linklater film, and when we were doing our scouting, he had his production designer selecting all the locations because he trusted his production designer to make that decision for him, saying, you know what I'm after, you know the look, you know the vibe, you're going to help create it. And so Linklater wasn't even part of it because he trusted his team so much. And it's like, that's kind of the situation that you ideally want to be in, where you just have, you know, the heads of department. They all have a shared vision of some kind. And then you're just directing 5 people, you know. Yeah. You're pulling one rope to pull the whole net out instead of trying to grab every fish out of the water. You know, there's a lot of systems in place to protect you in that way and to keep your vision authentic. Yeah. When I worked on Transformers, I thought it was weird because I worked on the 4th one. Michael Bay, typically you have first unit and second unit, and first unit, main unit, that's where all the, you know, the actors are, and that's the more important stuff. And then second unit is like, well, we need some B-roll of this car, or we'll just set up a bunch of explosions and do car chases and stuff like that. But typically the main unit is what the director directs, and the second unit they'll hand off to somebody else. But he oversaw main unit and second unit, which I'd never really seen before. I'm not saying he's the only one, but it was the first time I'd seen it. Cool. And it was like, oh, cool. So every day of this entire shoot is going to be Michael Bay screaming at everybody to make these explosions and da-da-da. He cares just as much about the B-roll as he does about the main unit stuff with the actors. And I thought, well, that's pretty cool.
That. Yeah, I appreciate that.
Because there's some weird tonal changes when you jump like that. Like you were saying, maintaining, like, you know, I would be worried about outsourcing that to other people because there's a chance it may not be quite exactly what you want. But the result of that is that in second unit, they just shoot it from every conceivable angle. And it just goes on forever because they're like, well, I'll show this to the director and maybe he'll like this shot or this shot or this shot or this shot. So just a lot of coverage. But yeah, it's... I could talk for 10 days.
Great. Well, I won't keep you here forever, but I do want to just a couple more questions.
Yeah. Sorry.
No. Yeah, it's
I'll sum things.
No. It's fine. No, I'm happy to listen to you as long as possible. But the thing now, so as I want to talk more about assistant director stuff too.
Yeah. Sorry.
I'm a director. So this is sort of the more selfish part of the podcast where I like to just see about how I can get better at the stuff I do and stuff, I guess. When you're working with a director, what is helpful to you for them to help you do your job or whatever? Like what's an ideal kind of thing?
You know, so how can you help me help you?
Yeah, I guess, yeah.
Like,
sure.
Like, you know, if
like what would help, like for in your experience, what's a helpful kind of what is something helpful about having a good working relationship with a director as an assistant director?
It's going to sound really weird and it's not necessarily an ideal, but what I've found in a lot of times when I've been a first AD, where I'm, directly working with the director, there's almost a weird element to it where we're not really supposed to get along. And I don't think a lot of people really highlight that as much. So if you and I could be great friends, and you want to have me on as the first AD, and you know what, you've got your vision and I've got all these logistics in my head, and the whole reason I'm protecting you from that is so you can maintain your vision, right? Just as simple as can be. But it's your audacity to do what you want to do, even in spite of me, as your assistant director. And so what I've noticed is that, and I'm not saying I've worked on the most amazing things, but what I've always kind of realized is that the director and the first AD don't really get along. And it's like kind of part of it. It's like kind of part of the ecosystem, because you're not really supposed to like me because I represent all the boring shit that you don't want to do, right? So like if I'm saying, hey, we really got to minimize these setups and we got to shave a few takes off of this, or hey, we got to break for lunch, or we got to do this, or something, and you're going to be like, whoa, I don't want to think about lunch or the real world or people's personal needs. I just want this footage, like this frame, this every frame of painting. Mm-hmm. And so it's like it's weird, and maybe it just ends up this way, but it's like in a way, I don't know that working together really helps you because of what I'm doing for you, that we're not really supposed to vibe. I'm supposed to be like, hey, suggesting things to you, and you're saying, no, don't. Like, I don't want to do that, or I don't want to do that, or, oh, I guess if we have to, if we must, because that's how you get what you want. Because all I want is to get the day done quick and everyone's safe. Well, I should do that out of order, but safety first, like no joke.
They're both necessary.
Yeah. And making sure that like
the vital,
because there's all sorts of limitations. It's like I've worked on shows where, and I keep saying shows, but I mean movies or films. It's just a general thing. Where you have an actor flown in for a week and you got to shoot the movie around that person, right? Mm-hmm. And it's a huge thing. The day out of days is something that people don't talk about enough, where it's like you have this person and we got to shoot this whole movie around them because we only have them those 5 days. Mm-hmm. And so there are times, and all the things I'm saying about, that we shouldn't really get along, you should still respect me and where I come from, because there are going to be moments where maybe you are getting a little carried away, or you're not really paying attention, and I need to refocus you a little bit. But there are things that are just genuine constraints. Like this person has to leave for this flight and get to their next job, or, we only have this baby for 4 hours and then we lose them. So it's things like that where, I'm supposed to protect you from a lot of this, but then you're also supposed to trust me when it's like important. Mm-hmm. And so that's the better part of the relationship that we're supposed to have, is that you're supposed to look at me and not get so frustrated with me that you don't even want to talk to me anymore.
Right.
You know what I mean? But you can't believe every single thing that I say. And that's the tricky real relationship that I've encountered, because a lot of times I rarely see directors and first ADs like palling around with each other.
Right.
Because they both represent two totally different things. And that's okay. Mm-hmm. And it's like, it's good to have that, as long as it's like a sibling rivalry. And then if you can talk about things, genuinely. But when egos get involved, then people, get bruised, or they, you have directors try to go do things without the AD team or something, getting in the way.
Geez, what?
Yeah, I mean, you have all sorts of things where they try to slide to the side and be like, oh, they're it's like the yearbook club is what I always call the AD team, because they're all very organized and teacher's pet, and they're, yada, yada. And they're there to enforce the rules, which is great. But sometimes the directors just want to do their thing. And I've seen, all sorts of stuff, not unsafe things, but just directions they want to go. Mm-hmm. And it's like sometimes it can serve the story. Most times it doesn't, because if you're a good director, you know what the hell you're there to do. And I'm just here to remind you. And you're like, yeah. But a lot of amateur directors just, they think it's like, I don't know where they get it from. I've never had that experience of just basically running around with somebody else's credit card. I'm just getting to do whatever I want, you know, and that's how some of them are. And the 80s are supposed to kind of regulate them in defense of the crew sometimes. And because, I mean, people shoot for so long, and then it's like they're not thinking about people having to drive home at the end of that 16-hour day. It's like you got to respect people's time. So it's like this weird
It's really easy
situation.
for a director to be willing, I can go for 35 hours. And it's like, well, you might feel that way about your film, but, you know, we've got other people here. And
right.
Yeah.
And some people are just happy to have that position finally, because it's such a coveted thing to be a director that when they finally get it, they're like, ha. And they can strut around with it. But it's
less about the film.
Right.
Yeah.
But that's, I mean, it's not always, we're not always talking, I'm not talking about Christopher Nolan by any means, or Linklater. Linklater, when I worked with him, his first AD was fantastic, and they got along really great. And he was a good dude, and he was, everyone got along. It was great. But I've just noticed that there's always some kind of palpable tension between a director and a first AD. And that's kind of what you want, is that sweet spot.
Yeah.
It's almost like having a trainer at the gym who like says, you don't have to do 10 reps. Just do 6, because you feel like doing 6. You know, it's like, why would you hire that guy?
Right.
If they weren't going to piss you off to kind of be like, oh, all right, fine. I'll hurry up, or, oh, I'll get ready for, break for lunch, whatever. It's like, okay, fine. It's 12 hours. Okay. Yeah. There's a blizzard coming in. We'll stop. All right. If I have to, it's like, you kind of need that.
But there's an understanding, like,
right.
As there is with someone who's working out, and with a trainer, this is what we're here to do. And, you know,
right.
That's good. Absolutely. So do you ever, whenever you're assistant directing, do you just, is there ever a thing that makes you interested in filling that role on any particular project, or is it just, it's when it comes up, or how do you go about that?
Well, I'm non-union, so I don't necessarily do it for the money. So some people would just say, oh, whatever. If they pay my rate, I'll do it. That's a lot of people. But I honestly say yes to a lot of things, especially on the independent level, because I really love the spirit of people wanting to make movies. I love that raw spirit of like, let's just get a bunch of people together and just shoot something. Just shoot something. And, you know, I've worked union jobs for a long time in my department. And, you know, when we're working and not during the strike, then we're pretty well fed. We're fine. But it's all very corporate jobs. And so for me, if there's a really cool indie that's like, well, you know, I don't really care if they have a lot of money, but I can take all this experience that I have from all these bigger shows and I can apply it so that this can run smoother. And like, I get attracted more to the spirit of it, just somebody actually trying to manifest something. And I just want to help. And that's a way that I can help, because I don't know anything about cameras. I don't touch grip and electric equipment. I don't do hair and makeup or wardrobe or much for the art department. So logistics is what I do, and that's how I can help someone make their thing. And that's largely what I've done. I mean, there's an interesting challenge to it. Like, I love the complexity of it and reading a script and breaking it down and seeing how we can actually do this thing for 20,000, 50,000, 100,000, 2.5 million, like within the within the time constraints with the resources we have. Like, that's my personal thing with it. And if I have the time to do it, but I'm not super discerning. If something really stupid was coming about and I read it and I was like, this is garbage, then, or I don't want to be associated with it, or it's tone deaf, or, you know, something. But virtually everything that I've worked on was for like $100 a day just to help them out. And then when I was there, I felt like a filmmaker, because I felt useful for being able to provide, you know, insight about certain things, or even just logistical things. It's like people get so caught up in the creative that they just forget, like, hey, where is everybody going to park today?
Right.
You know, and I just worked on an indie.
Oh, we got sunscreen.
Yeah, exactly. Bug spray. Like, how do we do it? So it's I'm not like most people in that respect. So there's a lot more blue collar people that just want their rate and they need to make X amount of dollars. But when it comes to certain things, especially supporting indies, I feel like everyone should just show up and just help out. Whether it's, 48-hour film festivals, it's smash and grab, it's like literally, what are you upsetting in your life unless you have a wedding to go to or something? But when it's like a month-long thing or a 2-month-long thing, and you only have 10 people in your crew, it's like, it can be a little tricky, but that's part of the spirit of it. And that's like how every filmmaker, for the most part, became who they are and who we talk about, because they started somewhere on that level and then got up to this level. So I just like to celebrate people who like really just give a shit and like want to do something. And that's just me. I can't speak for anybody else, because everyone else is just like, if I owned a camera, I'd be handing it out to people. Hey, you want to use my camera this weekend? You want to use my camera this weekend? Everyone with a camera? Oh, that'll be this amount. And then, you want the tripod with it? And you got these lens kits and these eyebrows and all. It's like they nickel and dime you because they're trying to pay back a loan. And it's like, well, I never went to film school, so I'm not in debt to help someone make a movie, because I don't have anything breathing down my neck saying you got to justify that degree you got. I'm like, no, I love filmmaking and I want to be a part of it. And that's by and large how I've actually AD'd most of the things that I have. So the screenplay I just finished, I was actually approached by a nonprofit who asked me to write something for their mission statement. And so I took that and I said, okay, well, let me see what I can do. And then I came up with an idea. I presented them a treatment, like a 5-page document, just sort of laying out beginning, middle, end, and here's the characters, and this is what happens to the characters. And they loved it. And then I had to write the screenplay. So I wrote the screenplay, and it took a long, long, long time. And it's a very heavy topic. And now that it's completed, then I can bring this to them once it's edited and I feel good about it, like really good about it, and then present it to them and say, okay, so here's the thing you asked for. Is this something that you will finance and that you will, want to help me create? And then we can kind of work together to make that thing happen. So that's pending, but we'll see how it kind of shakes out in the next couple of weeks with conversations that happen, all the pre-pro stuff that I was talking about. It's like, I tell people a lot, especially like very like bright-eyed students fresh out of film school. I tell them film is 90% paperwork and 10% creativity. So just get it out of your head.
It's a big desk job.
Yeah. And there's a lot of people that you've never even heard of that have been doing this their whole lives, doing a job you never even knew existed. Have you ever walked into a production office? Like, have you ever met those coordinators and the people that do all the work that they do? You don't know any of that. All you know is that, like, oh, that alien looked really cool. And it's like, there's a lot that goes into all these things. And so wanting to take that on as a producer myself for something small that I know that I can do, it's like, you have to still do the same rigmarole, get an LLC and get investors and then figure out a plan for distribution. And it's like all this stuff. It's like the production, the shooting takes a month and a half. That's whatever. But all the stuff leading up to it and all the stuff after, that could take years. So it's very tricky, especially knowing all that I do know about how tricky it is, knowingly doing that to myself and saying, like, I'm going to make my life hell for the next year and a half, but I love this idea and I really want to see it happen. So here we are. It's the life of an artist, I guess.
Well, fantastic. Well, Barry, thank you so much for joining me today. I've really enjoyed this conversation. It's been great to have you here in the studio. And just thanks a lot for coming out and taking the time. And I look forward to seeing whatever happens with the script that you just wrote as well. So we'll maybe have an update on that at some point. If you ever want to come back and like promote anything you're working on, just let me know. That'd be great. And
no, that's awesome.
Absolutely. Totally. So Yeah, doors always open, Barry, you know. So, hey, everybody, thanks for joining us for another wonderful episode of this StudioMEcast. And if you want to start your own podcast, you know, we got spaces here. Come on down for a free tour. Yeah, you, hey, pay attention. You just won a free tour. Just you. Don't tell anyone. It's a secret. And we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.